Lately, I've seen some discussion about the nature of morality and inherent evil in the world, namely just among friends, and it caused quite a dispute, mainly between the majority of the group and one particular individual. In short, it narrowed down to, is morality subjective or objective? But before we get into that, I'd like to warn you that if you're a religious individual, the video is not for you. I'm not going to go into details about why, save for just saying that religion, it's called having a faith because it cannot be determined whether that is the truth. Yet you still believe against the odds that it's likely not true. Since we cannot truly determine the existence of God, I'm not going to treat their word as a fact, and we're not going to discuss that in this video. With that out of the way, what do I mean by morality? Within the context of this video, morality refers to the system by which we categorize things as good or evil. At present, there isn't a practical unit by which we may measure the morality of a thing. That's because morality isn't a natural or innate aspect of reality. Morality is a social construct. Ideas humans proposed that dictate what's right and what's wrong. I find it rare that someone disagrees with that proposition. However, I do find individuals that propose specific actions are inherently evil. That's a little bit more common, despite same people agreeing with the previous statement. While I've yet to receive an answer concerning what that particular individual I mentioned considers to be inherent evils, I think it's safe to assume they're referring to things like murder, genocide, or other major crimes or atrocities committed by humans. The issue I take is that while acts like murder are inherently evil, they would be undisputably unjustified in any circumstance. To put it simply, you could not plausibly perform such an act without making yourself evil, as there would be no plausible context in which said actions could be considered good. That's kind of the trade-off with deeming something inherently evil. Thus, were murder inherently evil, saving several children by eliminating an active shooter would make you evil, as you are actively choosing to do something inherently evil. That line of reasoning doesn't add up to me. Instead, I would propose that morality of an action, idea, person, or place is entirely subjective. That's because our categorization of such things will change depending on an equal measure of context and our own personal experiences and/or biases. To better explain that, an analogy, I suppose. Let's say you live with an elder sibling. We'll say they're your big brother. You cut wood, you trade it in with the local village. One day, you found yourself removed from your usual resting place, and in your waking moments, you try to peek under the rugs you've been buried under, and you find your brother dropping to the ground, laying motionless and bleeding. Leaving is an armed man, leaving with not only a weapon, but also your food supply. Chances are, unless you're a sociopath, probably gonna think he's a bit of an evil dickhead and you're gonna want to seek vengeance. But that's not the entire story, so let's add that extra bit of context. Unbeknownst to you, you were the descendants of the land's previous ruler. Your older brother had been hiding, biding time until his father's allies could help restore the family's power. The man who killed him was an agent elected by a newly founded council to seek out the prince and eliminate him, ending the authoritarian bloodline that had tyrannically abused its power for generations. Of course, your brother's act wasn't necessarily an effort to preserve the bloodline for his father. He, from his perspective, just wanted to save his little brother. From your perspective, that's just a bad man who killed your big brother for no reason. And from his perspective, he was saving a nation and his people from more centuries of aimless death and suffering. With this added context, can't necessarily say that any particular person in that is inherently or objectively evil. Almost all of them have their own motivations and beliefs, which make it a little bit more nuanced and complex than just saying, yep, you're undeniably evil. That's kind of what I'm getting at. It's about perspective, the context, and also your personal opinions and biases. For me, I'd say, okay, the prince himself has yet to actually do something bad specifically. So it's not necessarily fair to send someone to get rid of him purely on suspicions. So I would still consider the assassin evil in some regards. Though I would also say, hey, he's been given information and he's been given a job. He's not the person who exactly signed off on this happening, so you could also fault other people as being evil. Though some people would say that the man is justified and the people who sent him were justified due to the threat to, well, the nation as a whole. And neither stance is particularly wrong. There's no real weight to say that one is right and the other's wrong. Those would just be philosophical arguments and a difference in values. And that's the point of that analogy. It really concludes my thoughts on the subject of morality. So to summarize, my stance is that morality is dynamic and oftentimes vague ideas of different things of wrongness relative to their experience of said things. So let's say morality could refer to your sense of whether or not murder is wrong relative to the impact that murder has had in your life. And that can relate to not only like murder being present in your life, but how your life has made you view murder and what you associate with it. And obviously you could switch that out for anything like stealing, racism, even just something like rationing. Anyway, that aside, if you're curious about my morality specifically, I believe that something must be directly responsible for demonstrable harm before it can be considered evil. And similarly, before a thing can be considered good, it needs to be directly responsible for positive impacts. However, that is simplifying a lot, and there's a bit more things I like to think about. Generally, I don't think a moral system should be so black and white. Mostly because my views, and I think everyone's views, should change when more information is presented about anything. That aside, thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear my thoughts on any other topics, and they can be serious or silly, feel free to leave a suggestion.